Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, the legal and government correspondent, and my special guest today is somebody who has actually stood in for me on this show, and that's Mark Gherty. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jamie.
Mark, you are the subject of the segment because of a recent event, and that was what?
I retired as of the 14th of December.
And we should say that Mark has been a longtime trial attorney here in Hudson, and not just any trial attorney, but part of the Gherty law firm legacy, and really a legendary local law firm. So I want to talk about a little bit about that because obviously it's a big day for you personally, but it came with all the other stuff that comes with kind of ending the Gherty legal lineage, if you will. So how long was Gherty Law Office in existence?
It opened, as I understand it, on the 2nd of January of 1947.
And by your dad?
My dad, he had just discharged out of the FBI. He served in the FBI during World War II and in various places around the country, New York, Chicago, Birmingham, St. Paul, and then took the bar exam in the summer of 1946, and then opened the office, as I said, in 47.
Okay. So. And I remember the 40s were back in a time where you didn't have to have an undergrad degree in order to be, go into law school. Some people went straight in.
And he abbreviated a lot because his father died when he was 13. They were running a farm out in Erin Township, 63 and G, and died when he was 13. He stayed on the farm, went back to high school at Richmond High School when he was 21, finished high school in 2 years, went to River Falls, and which at that time I believe was either the State Teacher College or the normal school, and did 2 years there, and then went on to St. Paul College of Law, which became William Mitchell and now Mitchell Hamlin, and graduated from there in 1942. So,
okay. Wow. So a lot going on with World War II and everything. So your dad started the office in 47, and if you closed it as of the end of 2018, that's 71 years by my math.
Correct.
That's quite a long time. And I mean, there's law firms that have been around longer, but not as many that stayed in the family. And so you started talking about your father, Lawrence Gherty, and just tell us, before we talk about the next generation, which included you, tell us a little bit more about your dad, because that's very unique that he had a father pass away at a young age. Obviously, his father was not in the law.
No, they were farmers, and and he was involved in county government, et cetera, and his brother Russell went on to become involved in county government. But Lawrence he came to town, his first partner was John Haywood of Haywood, Carey, and Anderson, and he and John were partners for a short time. He was partners with Charlie Ellefson, longtime family, and they were partners for about 7-8 years, and when I was in grade school. But he also served 2 terms as the district attorney for St. Croix County. Okay. And was a boxing coach for the high school, was a referee when boxing was still a sport in the schools in the 40s and 50s.
And did he have a stint as an FBI agent?
He was an FBI agent from 1942 through 1946.
Okay. Yep. So FBI agent before, I see,
yes,
opening the law office. Yep. But then continuous thereafter. What was, and of course, your father Lawrence being a lawyer in Hudson, which was much smaller back then than what it is today, but yet still a kind of a center of the circuit, if you will.
And it was the days. I mean, here we are in the 1965 courthouse. Next door is the 1905 courthouse. I actually saw him try a case in 1965 next door, a homicide case that actually went to see the closing arguments, and when I was in grade school. But it was at some of that time you could be the district attorney and be a practicing attorney at the same time. You had your law firm.
Okay.
Because of they just didn't have the volume. And
so he was a partner, had one partner you mentioned. Otherwise, was he a solo practitioner for
primarily,
most part?
yes, and had. I mean, I look back at the associates growing up, who they were. Bill Radosevich came to town, I believe it was 1969. He's the longest practicing attorney in Hudson right now.
Okay.
Semi-retired, but Bill was with him from 69 to 76. Steve
Okay.
Dunlap came to town, and that's when he came in 76. And Steve and my brother Terry joined the firm in 1974. And so, and then Terry helped bring Steve to town, and he was with us through 1988.
So your father's area of practice of law, obviously criminal, being...
It was trial work. He was, but again, a general practice. So it was not unusual for the wills and to do divorces, and specialization just is something you and I have grown up with. But
Exactly.
It really, you were not a specialist.
Especially when he opened the law firm, there was probably, what, 5 lawyers in the whole town.
Right. And again, they would have, it was an event each year to have the reading of the calendar. They would meet, it was the circuit, St. Croix County. Hudson was part of the 8th Judicial Circuit. And so all the lawyers would come to town, and then they would go to Ellsworth and they would have the reading of the calendar. They would go to Menominee for the reading of the calendar. So it was, you rode the circuit as such.
So a lot of involvement in western Wisconsin, and then the town grows, and meanwhile he has 2 sons, and you...
Actually 3, but
3.
Terry and I were involved in the law practice. Larry was not.
Larry was not, right. And 2 sons that follow him. And so tell me about that. You and Terry were how many years apart?
2.5.
2.5.
Yep.
So Terry went to law school when and where?
Terry went to law school in the University of South Dakota, as did I. And he was there from 1971 through 74.
And you were there from?
From 1977 through 80.
Okay. So then you guys, what made you get into the law? I guess what was your path?
You know, it's...
Because some people, when their father is in a certain profession, you steer opposite of that.
Well, I'll be very blunt. I have... When I first started college, my idea was I was going to be a teacher. I was going to go and I wanted to teach Asian history or Asian studies, that type of thing. History. Really didn't want to get involved in the law practice. I had seen Christmas Eves where phone calls were made and so hadn't returned the child, and there were issues that it was like something I didn't want to get involved in. And it was heartbreaking stuff. And you would hear about, you know, the horrible things, the calls that would be made. You'd leave in the middle of the night, as you and I have had to do to deal with things. And but I was in college at UW River Falls, and a little thing called Watergate happened, and I'm watching the players that were involved in that, and they were lawyers, and they knew better, and they were violating their oaths, and it was a bad time, and things that can get one's ire up.
Also at the same time of the end of the Vietnam War as
Correct.
well.
I mean, both Terry and I never won a lottery in our lives, but he had number 30 as far as lottery was concerned, and I had number 31 with the draft number.
Okay.
We both served in the Wisconsin National Guard. But it was a situation, all of that was going on in early 1970s. And so that's why I decided I can do some good here. And I've always liked advocacy and that type of thing, even through grade school and high school and debate and speech. And so it was...
so that was Watergate being in 74-ish, kind of turned the tide for you, but you were still in college then.
Yeah, 72 was Watergate actually, but then the resignation of Nixon and the pardoning was in 74.
Right.
And so I graduated college in August of 75.
Okay.
Yep.
And Terry's in law school about that time.
He was in law school.
And so what was Terry's impetus for...
He had always wanted to go into practice with my dad.
Okay.
That was always, I mean, from the time he was, they would ride together, be it go to court in Barron or go to court in Balsam Lake, that Terry would be in the car with him and carry the briefcase. And it really was a you know, an apprenticeship almost situation, learning the tricks of them, and hearing the two of them, or hearing Terry. There was a lot of my dad in the comments that were made, and the colloquialisms that were used and things, and how his timing in court was very similar.
Now, I remember Terry having a personalized license plate that said Atticus.
Yep.
What was the story there?
He truly, he loved that book, the To Kill a Mockingbird, and Gregory Peck, and it was, he read it many times. He performed when they did it in Stillwater, actually played the judge in that, in the play, but it was something that the ideals of Atticus Finch and the small town lawyer, and it wasn't unusual at a time when, and we grew up with it, that someone might show up with, here's 3 or 4 trout for your dad, he did me a favor, or and similar to what went on in To Kill a Mockingbird, being in a small town. That wasn't unusual. So.
Okay. So you mentioned your education. Now, so you get out of law school. Was it always going to go straight to work with your dad, or was there other?
That was the plan, and I worked, actually did insurance adjusting for a year in St. Paul, taking statements, meeting with people, et cetera. Before I went to law school, worked at Anderson's for 9 months, and then went to equity adjustment. But once I got into law school, I actually did clerk work, and so this was the beginning of Westlaw. So we didn't have online transfers. Fax machines weren't even available. So you'd draft a brief and send it by letter, and FedEx wasn't even around. But it was a matter of, I was doing briefs and sending them back, handwriting them and sending them back. So I was working as a clerk while I was
Maybe
in
you
law
had
school.
carbon paper, but that was...
There was carbon, yes.
Yeah, but
and
that
correctotype, that was the other
right,
thing.
but
Yeah.
there wasn't even Xerox machines. Yeah. So, all right. Now, how do you think people will remember the Gherty law office and Gherty and Gherty?
I hope in a good sense. I mean, we were, we lived by, and I still do, try by a high standard. And to be treated, from a standpoint, if I shook someone's hand and gave them my word, it was my word. And sometimes if we had to change, you did that. And if it's a matter of working with another attorney, that you knew that, at least that's the way I practice, that I held out that it was my word. We didn't have to put it into a contract as such. But so ethics were big for the firm. And that's what we attempted to do.
All right. Well, I never had the opportunity to meet your father. He passed away when?
Actually, 1 month, almost a month of the day before I graduated from law school.
Really?
I came home. It was Easter. I came home, gave him a hug at 9:30 in the morning, and they said, "I'll see you in Vermilion," which was Vermilion, South Dakota, and see you in a month. And we told each other we loved each other. I walked away. Got a call in the middle of the night that he had passed away. So,
wow.
no regrets.
Yeah.
You know, from a standpoint of being able to say goodbye to someone.
Yeah. Now, how old was he?
He was 67.
67.
Yep.
And then your brother Terry, we met also with an early
He died
death.
he was 1 month shy of, or 3 weeks shy of 65. So.
Okay, so he wasn't even 65. And
Yep.
now you've made this decision to retire, and you are how old?
I am 66.
Okay.
So.
Well, getting into your personal experiences with the law, and again, I should also note that the Gherty & Gherty law firm is known more for than just its legal experience and what it did in the legal community, but you've done a lot for the community as well. I want to just focus on your areas of legal practice. So what areas were those?
First off was general practice, but as I mentioned to the young lady as I came in, I tried my first case here up on the 3rd floor with Judge Bartholomew, and turned out to be my future sister-in-law. That was the first trial.
And I assume that's
that was Sue,
yeah.
Terry's wife, and who also practiced with us for
and it's still the
30
municipal
plus years.
judge
Yep.
here in town.
And so, but it was a matter of trial work, and literally after doing divorces for 8 years and doing general practice, Terry and I had a discussion in 1988. What do you want to do? And I said, I really want to just do trial work. And that's when I shifted from doing general practice, wills, deeds, etc., to just trial work. And that was criminal defense work, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and also I did 37 years, excuse me, of insurance defense work, and as well as some plaintiff's work. But it was doing insurance defense work, and I liked the trial part of it, not the coverage part of it. That was
right.
to the office guys.
You liked more dealing with the merits of the claim, and
yep.
You know, I guess that's how I got to know you, is through both senior at the courthouse on the criminal cases.
Yeah, because you were an assistant DA in Eau Claire, and that we never did run into each other over there.
That's right. Yep, for about 2 years there, and then came to Hudson and went into the insurance defense, and that's where we would run into each other. So what area how was that split as far as percentage, would you say, criminal defense and
at one time it was 50-50, and at the last 4 years, it really was 80% of the on criminal defense.
Right.
And
there's probably lots of reasons. We won't get into how the insurance industry has changed and how they've done their business, but what would you say gave you the most satisfaction, if there's a case or two?
It's from the standpoint that the privilege that we're given as a trial lawyer to come in and you're speaking for that individual, and that be it to try to put into words what an injury means to a person, to be able to describe that, you know, my back aches. This isn't something you make up, that you wake up at night, and to paint that picture. I had a poster in my office that I got about 15 years ago from, actually I do some skiing, and so it was from the Burka binder, but it was all these small pictures that made a larger picture. And that's essentially what a trial is. You take little bits of evidence and you get all the colors together to make it come, hopefully either by clear convincing evidence or beyond a reasonable doubt, to form that picture. And so the satisfaction is to be able to hear that jury say not guilty, from the standpoint of or if it's a matter of say we find for the plaintiff or we find for the defendant. It's your side, and again, as you're aware of the jury instruction where it talks about that, please enter a verdict that speaks the truth, and that's the way I have argued those cases going back to October of 1980.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question, and it's kind of a two-parter, so the question may not, or the answer may not be the same for both. But on the one hand, which case would you say that you got most press coverage for, if you will, or became most well-known for? And then what case was it that maybe gave you most satisfaction as far as result?
Certainly in 1994, I was retained to represent Jane Newman's family, and Jane Newman's estate, and essentially her little boy. And Jane had been murdered by her husband, and we proved that to a jury, a unanimous verdict. He's never.
Now, why you have to give most of our viewers haven't been around as long as I have in the community, and it was at the time quite front page material. But the reason that you had to, as a private practitioner, prove the murder was why? Because
the prosecution was not carried through by the state, and
which would be St. Croix County.
St. Croix County. At that time, the district attorney made the decision not to prosecute, and the sheriff's department were the investigators. They were involved in the case because it was out in the Hudson Township. So, from the standpoint evidence, we were able to show that it was this convoluted story of him finding her and then disposing of the gun because he didn't want made it look like a suicide, he said. And without getting into a lot of it, it ended up with, I mean, the publicity. We learned 10 days before the trial that that CBS 48 Hours was going to come and film and wire us up with microphones and to try the case like that.
Now, they had to get permission from the judge to do that.
Yes. And Judge Lundell.
And both sides have to agree to it.
Right. And Joel Porter represented Mr. Newman and did a very admirable and fine job. Joel's a great lawyer. So we tried the case for 10 days in the summer of 1997, and the unanimous verdict came back and said that it was a homicide and that he was involved in the homicide.
And I just want to point out that for terms of proving the murder, the district attorney's burden would have been beyond a reasonable doubt. In the civil setting, it would be less.
But this is so important because it's been thrown back at me a few times.
Okay.
Beyond a reasonable doubt is the criminal standard. The standard on the middle burden, and that being when an intentional act, he intended to kill her, that we proved by clear, convincing, and satisfactory evidence to a reasonable certainty. And that's the middle burden. That's the same burden that's used on a drunk driving case. That's the same burden that's used on quasi-criminal cases. And yes, it's not beyond a reasonable doubt, but 12 jurors, and they had the opportunity to not be unanimous in that case. They were unanimous, and they came back with a verdict of that it was a homicide. And
I'm assuming this is the obvious answer, but did you ever have a case that came close to it as far as press coverage?
Yes. I mean, the bomb scare at First National Bank that was in 1985. We ended up with the two of the top experts in voice identification. We brought them in from Michigan State and Stanford. They were here in this building. That got a lot of press.
So you were defending that?
I defended that.
Okay.
It ended up with a hung jury in federal court. Came back here. Jury was out for about 28 hours and with a conviction. And that got a lot of press. Another homicide involving a lady whose mother died in the car. All of these ones, but to come back with press and not to be blowing my horn. The one that I'm most proud of,
most memorable for you,
most memorable, was involving a little boy. It was a shaken baby case, and that little guy, and I'll just call him Jonathan. And Bob Zentera from the Hudson paper wrote 2 different articles about it. It happened to be right before Christmas, I believe that was '86. And that little guy, here I am practicing. I'm 6 years into the practice, and Judge Bartholomew calls me in with the district attorney and says, "You're going to be appointed temporary guardian for this boy, and we don't think he's going to live, and you're going to have to make some decisions." And I've got a little one at home the same age, and it was terrifying. And to get calls and go over to the pediatric unit, et cetera, to get to know this little guy who everybody said was never going to make it, et cetera. Well, that was August 1st. And on Christmas, he was with his foster mom, who ended up being a former nurse she's still a nurse, but former nurse at the northern colony that used to be at Chippewa Falls. And she ends up adopting him. And so for a little guy who wasn't supposed to survive, wasn't supposed to thrive at all, he's severely disabled, but he's still alive, and it's one of those so if you say, what are you most proud of, it's Jonathan.
Okay.
And so all of it.
That's a great story. Talk a little bit more about maybe the not legal cases, but other work in the community that's been satisfying for you.
From the standpoint, and we just lost Denny Darnold, from the standpoint of city planner, I am most proud of work I've done with the Chamber of Commerce, with things we've done, such as you and I are both in the Hudson Daybreak Rotary, doing community things such as that. And currently working with the St. Croix Bike and Pedestrian Coalition, working on expansion of bike trails, and with the new loop trail And to look in terms of it, I mentioned Denny because I have going through things wait until you've been practicing 38 years and you have to close your office. So going through all these things, the maps that I find that had nothing like our industrial parks. None of that was there because it wasn't there.
Right.
And now to be able to say, I was involved with committees that we expanded this or we did that, and to look back on it. And that's why, when Denny passed, it was a matter of, holy cow, this man had his hands on everything.
Did that make it more satisfying or fulfilling career to not just be totally legally based then?
Absolutely.
And so I have to mention, we'd be remiss if we didn't, that you did have some political run there. You didn't get highly involved in the partisan politics, but tell us a little bit about
I've
what your
stayed out of the
was there.
I like doing, and you've done them also, are the candidate forums. And if you're involved in partisan politics, you can't be involved in candidate forums. I'm not a member of any party, and I grew up. My father was a Nixon Republican, and I was proudly supporting George McGovern in 1972. So it was a matter of split, but never registered as anything. And so to look in terms of, I decided in 2008 to run for judge when Branch 4 opened up.
So that's over 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
And you're not the only Gherty to run for judge.
No. In fact, my father was appointed. He was appointed by Warren Knowles, served for 2 years, and then lost the election to John Bartholomew. They were very, very close friends. And
that would have been in the early 50s?
That was actually, he ran in 1967.
60s, okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then Sue ran for circuit judge, and then she's been the municipal judge for 20 plus years.
Okay. So one run for judge, and again, it was a very crowded field, and you won in the primary. And again, long time, long roots in the community. So we've talked some about your legal work. Any regrets?
Really not. I mean, I don't want that misunderstood. I can't say how blessed that I feel. I mean, my wife and I have been married for 42 years and 43 years this year. And 2 great kids, 2 wonderful grandchildren, and a family. I mean, what we've done living in town. When I hear you talk about that you were in Madison for depositions, et cetera, the days of to put on 24,000 miles a year on your vehicle because you might be in 5 different counties in 4 days, and to be able to say. And I was amazed with my dad because it was always, this little pie place is good in this little town. Well, I found those things out. Yes. And the cafes. And to be able to go into small towns and practice, and to have people trust you that we didn't spend much time on advertising. And so, but it was word of mouth, and to have someone say, I've heard you do a good job. I mean, that's the ultimate compliment.
Now, I asked you about any regrets, and in that answer you just gave, you mentioned your children. So what about the fact that neither of your kids followed you in the law to make it 3 generations in the law?
And I don't know if it's because they grew up in a trial lawyer's house. My son is a professional actor and has, and to be real blunt, there's some acting that goes on in trial law. And so, and it's he would make an excellent trial lawyer, and Megan is so kind-hearted like her mom, and so it's a situation, but she holds her own. Works as a logician or in logistics in the trucking industry, and so she can hold her own. So
So not miffed at all that that Gherty and Gherty is not still open?
No, not at all. And this is the future of this, and I am so happy with what's coming because we hope within the next few days here the closing will take place on the building, and it's going to be another law firm that carries it out.
And when we say the building actually has a name.
Yep, the Constitution Building, 328 Vine Street.
And it was called the Constitution Building because it was built?
It was built in 1976, but my father put that name on the building.
And 76 is just a couple years before the addition that both you and I live in, Gherty addition,
That's right.
was platted out.
So that was actually in the works at that time.
Okay.
So,
all right. Well, so the Gherty name was going to obviously continue on, not just because there's streets named after him, and but you know, just the practices and the people and the relationships that you build. So now that you're not going to a law office at 8 o'clock every morning or going to 5 different counties in 4 days, what are you doing with your time?
I am vice chair of the UW River Falls Foundation, working on that. We've had some reorganization and real excited about that and the future of that. We'll take over as chairman next year in 2020. Also serve on the Hudson Hospital Foundation board. Excited about that with the things that are coming and the development of the community again.
And board work is something that you've done for decades.
I have, and I really enjoy it. Now it's fun to be able to sit down and spend 2-3 hours where I'm actually working just on that, and
you don't have to leave a meeting early to go to a deposition,
or to worry about billable hours. Make sure I'm getting billed for my time.
Right, right. And you feel that this timing was good. I mean, you mentioned your father passing at 67, your brother passing just shy of 65, and having plenty of non-legal interests as well. So you're very happy about this?
I am, and I mean, my health is good, and I just I ski the Berkey each year. Now the Cordelope, the half race, and I love my bicycle, and I would like to ride my bicycle a whole lot more. And so it's do some physical activities and traveling if we can. Again, I not to be morbid, but when I look at that that time range there of dad and brothers, my brother Larry didn't make it. He was a month shy of 70. So
your goal is
the
to
sisters,
get past
they
70.
make it into the 70s. So
yeah. Well, and enjoy what you're doing. And I want to thank you. I mean, you've been somewhat of a mentor, but definitely a friend and a colleague for decades. So I really appreciate that. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Jamie. I appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks for telling the Gherty story. So
thank you.
We will look forward to your further efforts, and hopefully we see some results too on the bike path, because I think that's another legacy that can outlive us all. Yes. So, and I want to thank our folks for watching, our audience, very loyal, and appreciate you watching, and thank you for your loyalty in that regard, and continue watching us here on Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson. Keep watching.